Some heroes never sought the spotlight. This is their story. They say heroes are born in moments of chaos. But on the morning of the 14th of March 2019, in a quiet apartment building in Portland, Oregon, nobody expected the hero to be a 16-year-old kid who just failed his chemistry test. His name was Marcus Chen, and this is the story of the day he became someone he never thought he could be. Marcus woke up that Thursday morning like any other day, late. His alarm had been screaming for 20 minutes, but he had snoozed so many times that his phone had given up. He stumbled out of bed, grabbed his backpack, and headed downstairs. The Riverside Apartments on Morrison Street wasn't too fancy. 8 floors of aging brick, creaky elevators, and the smell of Mrs. Rodriguez. As cooking that somehow made it to every hallway. Marcus had lived there his whole life. 3rd floor, apartment 3C, with his mum who worked double shifts at the hospital. He knew everyone. Mr. Patterson on the 2nd floor, who always complained about the noise. The Kowalski family with their 3 loud kids. Old Mrs. Zhang who fed the stray cats. Mr. and Mrs. Abernathys, both in their 80s, who moved so slowly it took them 5 minutes just to check their mailbox. It was 7:47 a.m. when Marcus stepped into the stairwell. The elevator was broken again, had been for a week. He didn't. Mind 3 floors wasn't too much. That is when he smelled it. Smoke. Not the smell of someone burning toast. This was different. Thicker. Chemical wrong. Marcus froze on the landing between the 2nd and 3rd floor. The smoke was coming from above. 4th floor. Maybe 5th. It was seeping down through the stairwell like a grey ghost, getting thicker with each second. His first instinct was to run down. Get out! Call 911 from outside. But then he heard it. A voice. Weak. Confused. Hello? Is someone there? Marcus. His heart hammered in his chest. He pulled his hoodie over his nose and mouth and climbed up instead of down. The smoke got thicker. His eyes started watering. By the time he reached the 4th floor, he could barely see 3 feet in front of him. The voice came again. Help. Please. It was Mrs. Chen. No relation. Just shared the same last name. She was 74 years old and lived alone in 4B. Marcus found her standing in her doorway, disoriented, clutching her walker. Mrs. Chen. Marcus grabbed her arm. We need to go. Now. My cat, she said, her voice small and lost. I can find buttons. We'll find him later. We have to go. But she wouldn't move. Her eyes were distant, confused. Marcus realized she wasn't fully processing what was happening. The smoke, the fear, it had overwhelmed her. Marcus knew he had maybe 2 minutes before this smoke got deadly. He could carry Mrs. Chen down, save her, get out. But as he turned toward the stairs, he heard them. More voices. Muffled. Coming from the 5th floor, the Abernathys, Mr. Patterson, maybe others. His phone was in his pocket. He could call 911, get Mrs. Chen out, and wait for the firefighters. That is what you are supposed to do. That is what they teach you in school. Don't be a hero. Don't risk your life. But Marcus thought about the Abernathys. How long it took them just to cross a room. How they never make it down 5 flights of stairs in time. He made his decision in less than 3 seconds. Mrs. Chen, hold onto the railing and go down slowly. Stay low. Count the floors. When you get to the bottom, get outside and Don. Come back in. Okay? She nodded, suddenly focused. What about you? I'll be right behind you. He was lying and they both knew him. Marcus climbed to the 5th floor. The smoke was a living thing now, burning his throat with every breath. He couldn't see. He had to feel his way along the wall, counting doors with his fingers. 5A, 5C. He banged on each door. Fire. Get out. Everyone out. Mr. Patterson stumbled out of 5A, coughing. What the hell? Fire. Go downstairs now. Patterson didn't need to be told twice. He disappeared into the smoke. 5D was the Abernathys apartment. Marcus pounded on the door. "Mr. Abernathys, Mrs. Abernathys, it is Marcus from 3C. Nothing." He tried the handle. Locked. Marcus had never broken down a door in his life. He'd seen it in movies. But movies don't tell you that doors are heavy and solid, and that your shoulder will feel like it is shattering. He threw himself against it once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th hit, something gave. The frame cracked, and the door swung open. The smoke inside was worse. Marcus dropped to his hands and knees where the air was slightly clearer. He crawled through the living room, calling their names. He found Mr. Abernathys first, collapsed near the bedroom door. Conscious, but barely. Mrs. Abernathys was in the bedroom, sitting on the bed, confused and frightened. Marcus had no plan, no training. He was a skinny 16-year-old who couldn't even do 10 pull-ups in gym class, but he thought about his mom. How she came home exhausted every night from lifting patients, helping people who couldn't help themselves. How she never complained. "Mr. Abernathys, can you stand if I help you?" The old man nodded. Marcus got him to his feet, draped the man's arm over his shoulders. He weighed more than Marcus expected. Every step was agony. "Mrs. Abernathys, hold on to my belt. Don't let go." She grabbed the back of his jeans with surprising strength. They moved like a 3-person chain. Slow. Too slow. The smoke was getting worse. Marcus's lungs were screaming. His eyes were streaming tears. He couldn't see anything anymore, just followed muscle memory, counting steps to the door, feeling for the wall. Getting down 5 flights of stairs with 2 elderly people in thick smoke is not heroic. Marcus slipped twice. Mrs. Abernathys fell once, and it took 30 precious seconds to get her back up. Mr. Abernathys was coughing so hard Marcus thought he might pass out. 4th floor, 3rd floor. Marcus's legs were shaking. His vision was going dark around the edges. Not from the smoke, from pure exhaustion. 2nd floor. He could hear sirens now. Beautiful. Distant sirens. 1st floor, the smoke was lighter here. He could see the exit door. Beautiful and green and glowing. They stumbled through it into the morning air. Marcus collapsed on the sidewalk. Fire trucks were pulling up. Paramedics were running. Someone put an oxygen mask on his face. He watched firefighters pour into the building. They brought out 5 more people from the upper floors. The fire had started in 6A. An electrical fault in an old space heater. Everyone made it out. Mrs. Chen found him an hour later at the ambulance. She had her cat. Buttons had been hiding under her bed the whole time. The Abernathys were taken to the hospital for smoke inhalation. They were released the next day. Mrs. Abernathys baked Marcus cookies. Chocolate chip, still warm. Delivered to his door with a note that just said, "Thank you." The local news called him a hero. They wanted interviews. The school wanted to give him an award. Marcus refused all of it. Because here's the thing nobody talks about. He was terrified the entire time. Every single second. He wasn't brave. He didn't feel strong or capable or heroic. He just couldn't live with himself if he didn't try. A reporter caught him in the hallway at school 2 days later. "Marcus, why did you go back? Why did you risk your life?" He thought about it for a long time. "Because they were my neighbors," he finally said. "And nobody else was there yet. That was it. That was the whole answer." Here is what Marcus didn't. No, Mr. Abernathys was a veteran. He served in Vietnam and had 3 grandchildren. He never thought he grow up because of Marcus. He walked his youngest granddaughter down the aisle at her wedding. 2 years later, Mrs. Chen, Scat Buttons, lived another 4 years. Every day she look at that cat and remember the boy who sent her to safety. Mr. Patterson, the complainer from 5A, started volunteering at the community center. When someone asked him why, he said, "A kid showed me what it means to be a neighbor. Figured I should try it." Marcus failed the chemistry test. He got a D in the class. But he passed something more important. The thing about heroes is this: they're not special. They're not chosen. They don't have powers or training or destiny. They're just people who, in one moment, decide that someone else's life matters more than their own fear. Marcus Chen was 16 years old. He played video games. He was bad at chemistry. He forgot to do his chores. He was completely, absolutely, and that is exactly what made him extraordinary, because if Marcus could do it, scrawny, scared, unprepared Marcus, then maybe anyone could. Maybe you could. Thai pharaohs don't announce themselves. They don't wear capes, or wait for the perfect moment. They read the teenager in the stairwell who smells smoke and decides to climb up instead of down. They read the person who stops to help when everyone else walks by. They read the ordinary people who do extraordinary things, not because they read brave, but because they can't imagine doing anything else. Marcus Chen went back to being a regular kid. He graduated high school. He went to college. He became a nurse, like his mom. But on the 14th of March, 2019, in a smoke-filled stairwell in Portland, Oregon, he became something else. He became proof that heroes aren't born. They're remade. In moments like these, by choices like his, and maybe, just maybe, the next hero is listening to this right now. Therefore, the question is, when your moment comes, will you climb up or down?